All right, let me make sure we're good here, guys. All right. So, Rings of Power, episode 6. I can tell you something. It wasn't good. Episode 5 I thought was definitely good. It had some things that were, very likable. But episode 6, I mean, again, episode 6 did have some things I liked. But unfortunately, the Harfoot plot came back. Let's not talk about that first. The Harfoot plot, I'm just going to say it right now. There's nothing positive to say about the Harfoot plot. There's nothing positive I can say, just anything on that plot or the Gandalf plot. So let's talk about some other things I liked. I will say there were some things I liked. I continue to like Sauron. I mean, the performance of Sauron is just really good. That the actor is helping make some of the material that's not as good. Maybe not work, but I'm willing to overlook it because I like his performance as Sauron, or I guess Anatar at this point. But I don't know, some of the execution with the Celebrimbor stuff it's just questionable to me. And I think something that is occurring throughout this entire show is so much stuff feels rushed. Like, if you think about the Numenor stuff, which we'll talk about, feels kind of rushed with this episode and the last episode. This episode, it's like, in the last episode, Celebrimbor was like having this big thing. Yeah, humans and men cannot have rings. Okay, and then now he's at a full 180. Like, by the time this episode's happening, he's fully involved in trying to make them and has nothing else on his mind, which is kind of weird. I do feel like he's not really questioning Anatar a lot about any of the things going on, but I guess it's understandable. I don't know. There's so many things that I feel like are undefined. Like, how powerful is Sauron? Like, he's able to do an entire illusion that's in Celebrimbor's head, but at the same time, like, he's not powerful enough to take control of Adar and the orcs in the very beginning of the season. Kind of weird. But then also at the same time, he's able to do, like, maybe some tremors or something that messes up Khazad-dûm, but then also is able to destroy this bridge from far away. Like, I feel like Sauron's power just in general is not really defined that well. Like, sometimes I feel like Sauron has, like, no power, and then other times he's like what Sauron should be. Like, he has just a ton of power. I don't know. His power level just isn't really defined to me. The next thing I want to talk about. So, I don't think there's a lot to talk about with Sauron stuff. He just spends his time manipulating people for the most part and doing all that, which is good. I enjoy that. I think visually this episode is really good. But again, it's a good production show. It's just the writing's bad. The writing is just bad. So when we go from there, let's go to the next thing that's closest to it. So Galadriel's plotline with Adar to me is just very questionable. Because on one hand, you have Galadriel trying to work with orcs, and still this concept that orcs just aren't evil, which was like a core element of Tolkien's work. Orcs are literally corrupted elves and twisted elves. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense, in my opinion, like the way they're going about it. But whatever. But then you also have, Galadriel and Adar are making this plan of like, oh yeah, they should work together to defeat Sauron. But then she's like, wait, that's what Sauron wants you to do and all this stuff. And she never really has any regard for the actual elves, like her kind, or Eregion, which is kind of like, the jewel of the elf kingdom at this time. Like, it's just very weird to me. And I like Galadriel. I said at the very beginning of this season, they were trying to seem like to make her more likable. But then they do this stuff, and it just completely reverts her. She just has nothing going on with her that, to me, makes her like an interesting character or likable. She's just so one note and boring and just unlikable to me. And so that plot to me just was not making much sense. Also, there's this idea that Adar already knew Halbrand was Sauron. But then he literally had Sauron, or he had Halbrand in his possession as a prisoner, and then let Sauron go, and then followed Halbrand's plan. But then it's like, at what point did Adar figure out that Halbrand was Sauron? Was that because he captures Galadriel and she seems pissed off, and so then he kind of maybe put all the pieces together then? Because if he didn't do that, then there's something weird going on here. But then also, if he knows Halbrand is Sauron, why would then he... It's just like there's so much stuff that I just don't understand with the whole idea of Adar's character. And Adar was a character that mainly made sense going into this season, but now like I just don't understand the character at all. And then he comes up with this idea that, okay, Melkor, Morgoth's like helmet or crown, plus the 3 rings should be able to defeat Sauron. Where he comes up with that, I have no idea. Is there like a handout that says, oh, this is how you beat Sauron? Also, he doesn't even know what the 3 Elven Rings do, or does he? How does he even have that information? I don't even know like what they're doing with that whole plot line. It just doesn't make any sense at all. It's not the worst plot line of the plot lines in this episode, but it's pretty close. But yeah, so that plot line really doesn't make much sense to me, but whatever. So moving on to Numenor. I think Numenor is pretty good for the most part, and then they fumble it later on. So I like that, you know, Elendil is somebody that's not willing to cave in because of his ideals and, you know, pride and the way, you know, his life is. It's very similar to Ned Stark in Game of Thrones. It felt almost the exact same. Like if you even think about the format, the way that it goes down, right? And you think about the prison, you know, scene, which is probably the best scene of the episode. Elendil talking about, you know, why he is not willing to bow to Pharazôn and all of those beliefs that he has. I like that idea that, you know, they basically take straight from Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, this major thing is like, okay, what would you do to protect your family? Would you put your ego, your ethics, your pride aside and do what it takes to keep your family safe? It's kind of the same thing here, except in Miriel, and what Miriel's telling Elendil is that you cannot like die, right? You are vital to this, you know, just the success of Numenor in the future when it gets flooded or doesn't get flooded, whatever. You need to bow to Pharazôn for that to occur. And so it's Elendil putting his own ethics, his own beliefs to the test for the greater good. And I like that idea. It's just they copied it more or less from Ned. Like it seems almost the same thing. And you have Elendil in prison talking to somebody about what he should do, and them telling him to do something, but he doesn't want to do it. And so I liked a lot of that, even though it does feel like they kind of just took that from other things. But it was done differently to where it's like, okay, fine, sure. But then they do the whole thing at the end where it's like there's this sea worm or whatever they called it, and it's apparently a ritual thing where the faithful would throw people in this water thing to get eaten or not eaten. But then they have this specific place for this sea worm to be, or sea snake, or whatever they called it. It just was weird. And then Miriel also like being brought back up. I was like, okay, this was pretty cringy. Like I just didn't like the ending. I didn't like the conclusion of what they did with the Numenor like stuff this episode, even though I liked a lot of the build up to it. I don't know. Hi, Ruckus. How are you? Let me know. What did you think of the episode? So the Numenor stuff is just weird to me because I think it's just so fast. If you think about Game of Thrones, for instance, like a lot of the Ned stuff, you know, happens over a couple episodes. It feels like they just took the Numenor plot and they just crammed it in. Because, like, for instance, Elendil's daughter has no characterization at all. Outside of, like, okay, she believes that Miriel led to Isildur's death, which is pretty true, I guess. And then also that her mother died drowning. That's it. And then she's just like has this weird, like, there's no real characterization to the character, so I don't care about her as a character because they haven't given the character enough time to really develop as a character at all. And it feels like that's a lot of Numenor as a whole. Like, it feels like we should have had more with Pharazôn by now. We should have had more with Pharazôn's son by now. Even more of, you know, like Elendil, for instance. Like, it just feels like the Numenor plot needed to be like almost its own season. And it's being like scrunched down into like an episode or two. Does that make sense? That's what it feels like to me. Like, it just feels like things are happening way too quickly. We're just flying through stuff just to get to a point because that's where we need to be. So, yeah. I think Numenor is probably the second best plot of the episode. But yeah, episode is moronic as usual. Yeah, and I haven't even talked about the worst stuff yet, Ruckus. The worst stuff is, so then we get to the like Hobbit stuff, the halfling stuff and the Gandalf stuff. I don't know why this is in the show. I mean, I know why it is, because they want to try and be like, oh yeah, remember Sam and Frodo and Gandalf from the the original movies. But the problem is, these characters are so dull, they're so boring, they don't have anything going on for them at all. The plot is moving at a snail's pace. I don't even know what to say. Like, let's start with the Harfoots first. The Harfoots just generally are not very likable. They're not funny. They don't do anything interesting. They basically don't even have that much of the screen time in this episode, but it's just like, it just takes you completely out of the episode when you see Poppy or whatever her name is, and she's kissing the dude she's had like one conversation with, like in the middle of the entire like little village thing. And then you have the other person talking about, oh, like how they're going to form the Shire at some point. And you're just like, dude, this is so stupid. This is not forwarding the plot at all. None of this matters. I don't care about any of this. Like, I just genuinely think they should just completely drop. Like, if they do a season 3, which it seems like they're going to, they should just straight up do, just get rid of them. Don't even bring them in. Don't say anything about them. Just say they died or off screen or something. I don't even care. Get rid of them. Also, sorry if you can hear I think my mom is vacuuming upstairs. It's really loud. But, yeah, so the Harfoot stuff just doesn't matter. It's not, there's no point of it. It's like Daenerys in season 2. I say this every single stream. And it's even worse than Daenerys in season 2 or Clash of Kings, because at least Daenerys has her own like arc she goes through. This has no arc for anyone. It has nothing to do with the plot. It just doesn't matter. And so when those scenes come up, I almost just either skip it or I'm like doing something else waiting for the next scene to come on. So there's that. And then you have, so the other stuff in this episode, you have Gandalf. It's not confirmed Gandalf, but it's fucking Gandalf. I'm tired of this nonsense where it's like, oh, this isn't Gandalf. Just please shut up. Like, they literally have Tom Bombadil and Gandalf go to this like place, and then Tom Bombadil just starts spewing this nonsense and literally gives Gandalf's famous line with Frodo. It is just bizarre. It is bizarre that Tom Bombadil is the one telling all of these lines to Gandalf that he's going to recite later on, and it's just, and I'm just sitting there, I'm like, oh wow, member berries. Don't you guys remember when they did that line in Fellowship of the Ring? Don't you guys remember that? Wasn't that really cool? And then apparently Gandalf needs to go fuck around and find a staff or some nonsense. It's like, dude, the staff has nothing to do. Like, it has something to do with like Gandalf's power, but that's not like the sole reason he's able to do his magic or anything. That's so fucking stupid. It makes no sense. And it's like, okay, we're going to have this decision that's like literally exactly like The Empire Strikes Back. Are you going to help your friends? Or are you going to commit to becoming a better wizard? It's like, dude, are we serious? This is seriously what we're doing. We're so lazy. Like, and that's why it's like, something like them copying, for instance, Ned in Game of Thrones in the first season for Elendil. I'm like, okay, I'm okay with it because they did their own like spin on it. But then they do this other bullshit, which is just completely copying. It is completely copying Star Wars. And I'm just like, what are we doing? What is going on? I mean, this is just such shit. I mean, so yeah, Gandalf just doesn't matter, and he just fucks around, and then we cut from him. We don't even get to see like what they're doing with that plot at all. He just cuts away. Whatever. I don't even know. Also, I didn't mention the dwarf plot, so let's talk about that. But Farazan's character changed as quickly as Daenerys in season 8. Yep, I agree. The character just changes too quickly. They don't give enough time for that character to grow. But the dwarf plot. The problem I have with the dwarf plot is it feels like every ring is the One Ring, right? Like, why is all of these rings giving the powers of like the One Ring? Like, it's making, Durin like go crazy and greedy within like a span of a couple days. Like, Frodo had the One Ring for months before it ever started truly affecting him in a bad or negative way. And then even then, he was over to overcome it at points. In the lore, the dwarves are not directly under Sauron's control because of their strength and their will. Now, it does mean that they become more greedy and they start, getting more, trying to get more wealth, and that's why the dragons come, and that's why a lot of the dwarf kingdom starts to go downhill a little bit. But the fact that, like, Durin's just completely fucking just gone at this point, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And then you have Disa and, Durin as well, and their whole plot makes no sense. It's just like, we're going to boycott people mining. And so Disa, again, I hate this stupid, cringe-ass, whatever her name is, Disa, just trying to speak to the mountains. I don't even, and it's just like her yelling at people, and then they're like, oh, is this supposed to scare us? And then she summons bats, and I'm just like, oh my God. Tolkien must literally be like rolling in his grave right now. It's so cringe. It's so bad. It's just terrible. And it's like, okay, so what is Disa gonna sit down here forever and just keep doing this over and over again? What happens when they go report the guards and they go execute Disa? It's so stupid as well that, like, Disa, apparently she interacted with the Balrog, but doesn't know. Does she know what it is? Because she hasn't said that it's that. I just don't know. I mean, the dwarf plot is just terrible now. I mean, it was good for a while, and now it's just not very good anymore. It feels like, for instance, The Hobbit, when Thorin just gets greed sickness in the matter of like a couple hours. So yeah, episode 6, like, it had some enjoyable stuff in it, like with Sauron and Numenor at times. But overall, the episode was bad. I mean, this is like a 4 or 5 out of 10. It's not as bad as episode 4 of this season, but it's not good. I don't know. So I wanted to get a quick review in for you guys because I just want to get my thoughts out there for the episode. I just, I don't have enough willpower to do content around this show because it's not good enough to do it. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to. But yeah, Ruckus, like I talked about, they basically straight up copied Ned's imprisonment. It's the exact same theme. It's almost the exact same dialogue, just twisted around a little bit. It feels like it's in the same ballpark, but it's not the same thing, more or less. But I don't know. Yeah, but thank you, Ruckus, for stopping in, and let me know, anybody coming into the video or stream later on, what you thought.